You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. Today, we are talking about coping skills and, coping with different aspects and types of trauma. And with me today is Dr. Joanne Frederick. She is the author of an anthology, or I guess I would say more of the person who put it together, right? Of the anthology Copeology. So, Dr. Frederick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tracy, for having me here today. I'm excited.
I am excited to have you. I don't think we can ever talk enough about coping skills and how to manage and deal with, all the residual stuff that comes along with our traumas. So I think this is, it's going to be a great show.
Definitely.
So, I think let's start with Copeology and tell us a little bit about what caused you or prompted you to create the anthology.
Yeah, thank you. So what prompted me? A couple of things. So first, I'm the executive director of a nonprofit that we opened in a Baptist church in Maryland. And what I did with that was provide counseling services, individual counseling, couples, group counseling to the community in Maryland. And out of that, so since it wasn't a church, there's an audience there on a Sunday. And we would hold groups, certain topics, and a lot of people wouldn't come. So I asked the pastor permission to come to church on a Sunday and talk about counseling related topics like suicide awareness, trauma, all of these different things. And they gave me the consent. So what we started doing was his sermon would be in alignment with my mental health conversation. And a lot of people could gravitate to it. It was almost like we were bringing therapy to where people already are, as opposed to expecting them to come into therapy. And so I call that something. And what I called it was bibliopsychoeducation, which was taking a small religious book. In this case, it was the Bible, and coupling it with psychology and counseling to help people cope with life's events. So as time going along, especially during the pandemic, I realized that, yes, a lot of people continue to come to counseling. I do everything virtually now. My organization does everything virtually. However, counseling, everyone can't afford therapy or afford counseling. And when I say afford, I'm not just referring to financially, but also the mental readiness and toll that it takes to be in therapy to talk about all types of trauma. Also, it takes time where we actually have to take 1 hour every week or twice a week and put that aside. So I started thinking about what tool can I create for folks who can't afford therapy, that they can read it, look at it, view it in the privacy of their own home and walk away and gain some skills that they can practice, or at least open conversations that they didn't know it had a name of whatever it is that they're dealing with. So that's what made me write Copeology. I started writing about this whole concept of combining spirituality to help cope. But then I asked about 7 friends of mine to write a story, and that's where the anthology comes in. But the question they had to write about how has spirituality helped them cope in life? And everyone, of course, definition of spirituality is different. The way we practice spirituality is different. And so there's a lot of diversity in these small stories about, coping. So one person, for example, spoke about dealing with loss, sexual trauma, childhood abuse, divorce, single parenting. And this is different topics.
Right.
But as their topics came up, I put the counseling spin in it on, well, what can you do? If you're reading this, you dealt with these things, what can you do from a therapeutic point of view? And that's how Copeology came around. I did create the name, it's trademark. And for me, the name means cope is, being able to have techniques to survive anything. But then ology is the study of. So if we study how to cope, whatever comes our way, we'll be able to cope with it. And thus the idea of Copeology.
I love it. I love the name. I when I first saw it, I was like, that is so cool. It's just one of those things that just kind of hits you. And it's like, oh yeah, I like that. So, I think that it's fantastic to have a tool like that for those who aren't quite ready for therapy for whatever reason. And I totally get you about there's so many people who can't afford it. My nonprofit focuses on the financial aspect of it mostly, or we will once we get the program up and running. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you have to put in the time and the work and the effort. And it's not just I'm just going to go, once a week for an hour. There's the mental stuff afterward.
Yes.
It's a lot of energy and a lot of work to heal your mental self.
It is. And you have a point there where, okay, you can come into therapy for an hour, but that's just an hour out of 23 hours, 24 hours of a day. But that's also a little bit of time compared to the traumas that someone has gone through and they're trying to heal. And then there's times that people have gone through things and it was traumatic and they don't even know, right? Mm-hmm. They thought it was normal, whatever. And so therapy does unveil all of that. I have clients that get nervous, anxious, even come into therapy because they know that they're going to be working and have to deal with those feelings. There are side effects of therapy, and the side effects are those feelings of being sad, crying, feeling guilty. All of those are side effects to come into therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some of these side effects, not just of therapy, but of trauma, and how we can learn to manage them and live with them. So, for example, guilt and shame is a big one. Regardless of the trauma, I think guilt and shame is almost always a factor at some point. So, what do we do when that guilt starts creeping in?
Yeah. So first, let me define trauma. So we all on the same page and folks know what it is. Trauma is any event that you have personally been through or you've witnessed or you haven't even been through it. You may have heard about it. We call that vicarious trauma that has an impact on you. And so a good example of that would be, for example, when George Floyd was murdered on television. Many people never met him, don't know him, but to keep seeing that is traumatic, right? And then, of course, we have the trauma that people actually went through themselves. So they were sexually abused, or even hearing those stories or having a family member, that is the traumatic event. But the symptoms of trauma could be anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, restlessness, crying, nightmares, triggers where if someone hears something, smells something, tastes something that reminds them of that event, it triggers all of these symptoms. And so you talked about guilt and shame. So with the shame, a person can be very shameful for even experiencing that trauma. So let's say sexual abuse, right, or molestation. A person will feel like it was their fault. So that's where the guilt comes in. Or they could have stopped stopped it. Oh, they knew. And that's not true at all. It's not your fault. That's the first thing I tell people. And so let go of that, right? Have some peace. That was not your fault. And so that's some of the guilt. Another type of guilt, and I talk about this in the book, is survivor's guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where there's a traumatic event that you went through, and other people went through it and they didn't survive, meaning they didn't recover. They may have died, so particularly since we're living through a pandemic, a lot of people experience survivor's guilt as it relates to having COVID and surviving. So one of the stories, one of the young lady talked about being in the hospital and intubated for a long period. And somehow she survived COVID and can't believe, I can't believe I survived. And why me? Like, how come I'm not, one of those almost million people now who's died? And so all of that, again, is the traumatic event. The guilt that comes with that, the shame that comes with that, the survivor's guilt.
When my husband died in 2019, he had a widowmaker, a fatal heart attack. And I was there when it happened. I was there from the beginning of it, when he first started complaining about his arms hurting and his chest hurting, and right down to being on the phone with 911 while I'm doing CPR. And then 3 days later, having to make the decision to turn off life support. And so I dealt with guilt for a long time, not necessarily technically survivor's guilt, but more of, I didn't do enough. I didn't start CPR fast enough. I should have made him go to the hospital as soon as he started complaining. All of that kind of, if I had done this, maybe he would still be alive, all of that kind of guilt that comes along with it. And it took me a long time to process through that and to understand that I did everything I could.
Yes. Well, first, thanks for sharing that story. And please accept my condolences, because number one, that was hard. And number two, that was recent, and even no matter how recent a person passed away, it's still, that intimate relationship that's lost. And you're right. That's the feeling. Like, had I noticed quicker, if I did this quicker, if I made the phone call, and that guilt. And the thing about that is, that's a self-talk, and it could even be a negative self-talk where we're getting on ourselves, right? That's one, but it's also part of the stages of grief. And what that is the bargaining. Like, if I did this, this wouldn't have happened. I should have, I could have. And that is part of that cycle of surviving grief and loss.
Yep, absolutely. Mm-hmm. In fact, the day that we're recording this, I'm actually putting on a webinar this afternoon about grief and loss. So, it definitely is part of that cycle. And, some of the things that I learned to do is, when that guilt came, started creeping in, and those questions started running through my brain, was to remind myself, I did everything I could. I am not a trained professional. I don't know if I had done things sooner, if I had got him to the hospital sooner, if that would have made a difference. I don't know. And to sit there and beat myself up over it is not going to bring him back. So, just reminding myself of that kind of thing, being gentle, being kind to myself, which is very hard because I'm very good at beating myself up, like so many of us are. But, just really kind of holding myself in that space, in that moment of love and compassion, really kind of helped me to get past that stage of things, of the grief.
Yeah, two things you just said. I just opened Copeology because you sound like you read the book and you're actually like speaking from the book, right? And maybe you did read it.
I
I don't
haven't
know.
read the book yet.
Right,
No.
right, and that's why I'm going to share two things. One, I had tips on managing survivor's guilt, and I'm going to share that. And then you also spoke about the compassion and the love that you had to have for yourself in order to heal from this. And so there's an area here about love yourself too. But just going back to the managing survivor's guilt, I talk about acknowledging that you have endured a traumatic event.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is no right or wrong way to feel, because sometimes we feel like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't, but there is no right or wrong way. The other thing I talked about was allowing yourself time to mourn. Mm-hmm. Right. And then also finding that support of other survivors so that you can share your experience and get reminders from people who can relate to your story.
Absolutely. For me, the support was crucial those first couple of months. Mm-hmm. I've gone through death before, but nothing like this with my partner. And so I immediately jumped into some widow support groups, and it was perfect because, those first couple of months when I was still feeling lost and alone and unsure of what the heck the future was going to, look like and hold for me, I could go into those groups and I could be like whiny and I just want him back. It's not fair. I just want him back,
Yes.
And they understood. So it was a place that I could go and I could just vent and let it out with people who completely got it.
Yes.
And, they didn't need to fix it. They didn't need to offer suggestions. It was just a place, for me to go, and they could listen, and they just knew, they understood. So the support groups are crucial, no matter what kind of trauma you've been through.
I agree. I think with support groups and just talking about issues, you ever had that feeling where something was going on and you just spoke about it, right? In a group or, privately, and you felt so much better. And it's not like the issue was resolved. You just feel relieved because you spoke about it.
Yep. You got it out.
Yes, you got it out. And then on top of that, if there's other people around you that can relate and share their story, there's a connection now, and you're not alone, right? With this grief or this trauma or this loss, you're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my best friends I met in the group, and he and I, we both have found love again. He's very happy in a relationship. I'm engaged, getting married in 4 months. But we still have those moments, and we know that we can message each other and be like, I just miss her. I miss him. I miss this. And it's just somebody that you can go to who is like, yeah, I totally get it. I hear you, dude. I know it's been 3 years for you and almost 3 years for me. And I get it,
Yes.
And that's just, it's just so important to have that support.
Definitely. And even with that support, what I'm also hearing is that it's important to have their memory alive as well. Like it's okay to reflect on good memories, with the person that you lost. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about some of the others, like triggers, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, things like that can trigger different memories. So for example, the smell of SpaghettiOs. I can't stand the smell of SpaghettiOs. I won't eat it. I mean, I'll make it for the kids, but I like hold my breath or plug my nose. And that's because it links me back to a traumatic experience I had as a child at a babysitter's house. So, things like that just all of a sudden bring up these emotions.
Yes.
What can we do when that happens?
Yeah. Well, first, our brain stores memory, all kinds of memory, sound, scent, color, taste. And so that traumatic event is associated in the brain with some of the things that's around. So in this case, there's the scent. And the thing about it is, with that scent, it can come up anywhere, like where you're not even at dinner.
Yeah.
You're, I don't know, watching television, and this scent just comes back and it reminds you, and mentally it takes you back to that moment where that traumatic event was, right? And so your question is, what can you do when that happens, right? A couple of things. So one, acknowledge, right, what's going on, right? And that means that it takes work to talk about some of the things that I'm sharing, because sometimes people don't even know why this scent, like it's just there and like we don't know. And that's why going back to basics, which is talking about things, I call it secrets. Many of us, all of us have some type of secret. We have to let that secret out somewhere and talk about it. And then we can start identifying these triggers and what it meant. And so when that happens, we should pause what we're doing, acknowledge where is this coming from and what happened. But then also, if it's possible to remove yourself from that triggering event, if it's possible, because sometimes it's not, but just acknowledging. But then also for some, it causes anxiety. And for some, it can cause depression. If it's causing anxiety, we need to learn relaxation techniques. So that could be guided imagery where you're in a particular place, but mentally you put yourself in your favorite relaxing place. For me, it's a beach or anything blue. I like blue, is common for me. Or you can do like yoga, meditation, just certain things to kind of like mentally get recentered during this triggering event. The other thing too is a reminder that this triggering event that may be causing anxiety, it is temporary. And many times it's a couple of seconds, but it may feel like it's a long time that you're in this space, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. It feels like sometimes it time just kind of slows down and drags on, and it is only a couple of seconds. I've had triggers where I don't even know where they came from, or I'll smell something and I'll be like, okay, I'm feeling anxiety now after I smelled that. Why? And I'll have to kind of sit and analyze and just see if I can try and figure out what the event is that it's linked to.
Exactly. Yes.
Being aware of what my triggers are allows me to prepare for them if I know I'm going to face one, So if I know I'm going to open up a can of SpaghettiOs, I am prepared for that. If I know I'm going to hear the song Amazing Grace, that is a big trigger for me because that's what was played at my dad's funeral. I can prepare myself for that. But deep breathing for me works very well as well. And like you said, if you can remove yourself from the situation or avoid it before it happens, those are all very helpful. So for me, and I think for most people, the biggest thing is really identifying what those triggers are as they happen.
Yes. And something you just said was important. Well, you can look at these triggers as in 3 stages, maybe 4. One is identifying the trigger, but also preparing for it. And then during this event, just trigger an event, what do you do? And then even after, what do you do? You could look at it in those 4 stages.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Frederick, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I could go on forever and talk about this because there's just so much information about it. But thank you for coming on and sharing about Copeology and giving us, some ideas on how we can handle different things that come up in our life. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I'll add, that Copeology is available on Amazon in case anyone wanted to have some more tools in their back pocket to survive trauma.
Absolutely. And listeners, you know the drill at this point in our conversation. I'm going to tell you that all of Dr. Frederick's information, the link to her book, her website, all of that will be in the show notes. Just go to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up her episode, and everything will be there for you. If you are listening from one of our apps, Apple Podcasts, Google, Pandora, iHeart, whatever it is, give us a like, give us a follow, and thank you as always for tuning in. We'll talk to you in the next show.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.